Hi, my name is Annette Harpole, and I'm here with my parents at their home on Sunday, December 6th, 2015, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I wanted to ask them about the community health center that is now known as the Isaac Coggs Community Health Center, formerly the Harambe Community Health Center. So they're going to talk to you today about how it all started. So my parents are Mildred L. Harpole, and my dad is Reuben K. Harpole Jr. Thank you. And my name is Annette Harpole.
Well, we were both working with the St. Elizabeth's Church on 2nd and Burleigh when the parents wanted a school of their own, and they petitioned the Archdiocese to give them the school that was at St. Elizabeth Elementary School. And during that period of time, they selected a couple of principals, but they eventually asked my wife, Mildred, to be principal of the school, and that's when I started working with the school, helping them. I worked with the newspaper called Harambe Shopper, and we had the kids to write their own stories, and of course the teachers helped children with their English and so forth, and the school developed nicely. There was a nurse who had been a nurse. She's a nun, and she had been a nurse at a hospital for a number of years. And she and another African-American nurse used to visit some of the parents in the neighborhood around the school, which was at 1011 West Burleigh Street. And so she mentioned the need for health care in the area. And then later, we started a little committee based on her comments about the need for health care in the neighborhood. And we had about 4 or 5 people on that board studying the whole concept of health in the Harambe area. Harambe was from Capitol Drive south to Walnut Street and the expressway east to Holton Street. That was the border of Harambe. It had about 7,000 household units in that area. And we eventually started a Harambe Ombudsman project, which visited all of which had block leaders, and the block leaders had something like 4 or 5 blocks per block leader. We had about 400 block leaders. And
this was in what time period?
The time period started with about
60 something.
1961, 62, something like that. And it took a while for the school to take off. It took a while for the Harambe Ombudsman project to take off. But during that process, this nurse from Harambe has planted the idea, the need for health care in the area. So then we had a committee where we studied the health needs of the area.
Was this in the 1980s? Did you? So
No.
1960s still?
60s.
Okay.
And we started working with Connie Panegas, who was the health commissioner for the city of Milwaukee. And he tried to help us by setting up a health clinic, which was at Garfield Park, which is about King Drive
Chambers.
and Burleigh.
And Chambers.
And he was working with a young African American who was working on his PhD in healthcare. And of course, that kind of fell through, didn't happen. So then we started the Harambe Health Committee, and they, with the help of Connie Panegas, they asked, we got I was on a school closing committee at the Milwaukee Public Schools, and we decided to give Fifth Street School to the City of Milwaukee's Health Department, where Connie Panagis was the executive director. Then they applied for a grant to fund the center from the Johnson Foundation. And my wife at that time was chairman and spokesperson for the health committee. And so when they sent their president and executive directors from the East Coast to Milwaukee, my wife testified before them, and they were impressed with what she had to say. And they funded that center with $5 million for 5 years, so that the people could have the health care service without an insurance.
And this was in the 1960s?
In the 60s, right. And later, because we were
In the
working
early
with
70s.
Marcia Coggs, who was the wife of Isaac Coggs, and a county supervisor and also an assembly person, and we ended up naming the center the Isaac Coggs Health Center.
But did that take place in the 70s when it was renamed, or was it renamed in the 80s? Was it renamed?
I think in the 80s.
Okay, and then so it's the Isaac Coggs Community Health Center. Is that what it is, or is it
Well,
The
several
Martin-
things happened in the meantime. We moved from Garfield Park to Fifth Street School, and the school, of course, was much more space, and so we solicited the dental school at Marquette and asked them if they would set up a dental clinic at the center, and they agreed. And so we were able to give health services and dental services at the center. Eventually, the center operated until the early 90s, and then it became it moved to two sites, one on Martin Luther King Drive and the other was on
Silver Spring.
Silver Spring.
Oh, okay.
Then it was renamed again, the Martin Luther King Health Center, which is a newly built facility on Martin Luther King Drive, and that exists today. And as far as I know, they're only giving health services, not dental services. I think the Marquette Dental phased out. But one of the things that precipitated the development of the center was a survey that was conducted by the UW Extension, the Center for, what's the name of it? The Center for
Urban Community Development.
Urban Community Development. And about 1,000 people in the Harambe area were interviewed, and it was learned that there were many very, very low poverty people, some who were existing on dog food and were in just very bad shape. They had no heat.
Poverty was heavy.
And they had a multiple of health problems. And so this precipitated our aggressively going for a grant. And the rest is history.
So you were about so Dad, you worked at the UW
Center for Urban Community Development.
and Mom, you were a volunteer.
Principal.
No, I was volunteer at the I was a volunteer with the health group.
with the health committee?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also, Dad, you were telling me a lot similar. Well, not the same aspect, but you were telling me about what happened at the tannery. That there were you started an adult literacy program at a tannery back in the 60s or early 70s when you were with UW Department of Development? Department of Community Development. There was a tannery.
Oh, the tannery, Albert Trostel Tannery, yeah.
Right. Can you talk about the adult literacy program that you started?
Oh, okay. I was working at the Milwaukee Star newspaper, and
This was in the 60s?
In 1960, yeah, 1960 through 66. I went to part-time with the University of Wisconsin in August of 1966.
Okay.
But prior to that time, I was advertising manager for the Milwaukee Star newspaper, and the newspaper was growing and becoming great because we had great staff. We had Ken Coulter, who was the owner. We had Richard Carter, who was a good writer. We had Walter Jones, who was an excellent writer. We had Jay Anderson, who was a great writer also. And we had George Sanders, who was the graphic artist. And with that, then we brought in, I went to Marquette University and asked the people in the journalism department if they had somebody that they could send over to help us out at the newspaper. So they sent Marilyn Morehauser over, and that caused our newspaper to really grow and become great. And as a result of that, we ended up taking first place of all the black newspapers in the country. We did it about 2 or 3 times, becoming the best newspaper in the United States, best black newspaper in the United States. Marilyn Morehauser worked with Lloyd Barbie on the program of trying to integrate Milwaukee Public Schools. So their program was called Music, and I helped put the I into music, which meant Milwaukee United Integration Committee.
Mm.
And
So
then one day, the manager, the employment person called the Milwaukee Star and asked if they could send somebody over to help find out what was going on at the Albert Trostel Tannery. And so they sent me over to find out. And the reason why they called the Star is because one of their employees was shooting at one of their superintendents running up and down Canal Street in Milwaukee, and they didn't know why the wildcat strike was taking place, because they had a contract that said that no wildcat strikes, and of course that was broken. And what I found out after about 2 weeks of study, where I interviewed different members of the tannery, what was going on at tannery, because the workers would work sometime for piecemeal, and they'd have to trust the supervisor to tell the personnel office how much money they had coming to them. Well, we found out after many weeks of study that a lot of the workers knew how to count and knew how much money they had coming to them, but they couldn't read, because the employment agency had a work study plan drawn out, and they posted the results of the study above the time clock. So hoping that the workers, when they would punch their clock out, they could see the change in the money for the work that they were doing, because they were working. They would get so much money by shaving off the hair of cows' skin, and when the end of the week would come, they get a check. Well, the 1 week when they had that work study, they changed the process of the work study program, so that the workers thought that the supervisor has taken their money, and they were dependent on that money for their family because many of them were very poor, and they were trying to feed their family and and have a place for the family to stay in a house and their rent, and if they were buying a house, their mortgage payments. So by them cutting their funds, they thought that supervisor was stealing from them, and so they were going to kill him. So I was a little afraid going around interviewing them because a lot of them had gold earrings hanging off of their ears, and I had to go into the taverns a couple of places to find them. And when I see these guys in the tavern, they were kind of rough. One guy named Ezel Beasley, he was so strong, he could lift a lot of those cowhides with two hands. The cowhides weighed about 200-300 pounds apiece, and he had muscles coming out of his neck. And sometimes when the guys would get into a fight at the Albert Trostel Company, he could separate them and lift them both up off their feet and shake them and tell them to cool down. And so he was quite well respected in the tannery. So after I found out what was happening, that the employment agencies had posted the signs up letting the people know that there had been a change in how they were being paid. I knew then that they didn't know how to read. So I went to the public library, and I talked with one of the guys at the library to ask him if he could come over to Albert Trostel and help the people there learn how to read. Well, he said no, he couldn't do it. So two guys came over, one from Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance, and the other guy was from Manpower, because I had a relationship with Elmer Winter, who was one of the founders of the Manpower organization. And so they set up a program. They sent some teachers over to work with us in the cafeteria, in a room just off of the cafeteria at the Trostel Company, to teach the men who didn't know who wanted to learn how to read but couldn't read, to teach them how to read. In addition to that, there was a lady that was very famous in Milwaukee for cooking peach cobbler pies, and she had a restaurant on the corner of Green Bay Avenue and Ring Street. So I brought her down to the Albert Trostel Company, and they let her cook for the men. And this was a big event because they were cooking greens and black-eyed peas and ham hocks and things like that. And the men had never had that before because the cooks they had before didn't know how to cook soul food. And the managers of the Albert Trostel Company remembered that for many, many years because they enjoyed the food also. And so the men, they didn't have any more strikes.
So,
and then
improved productivity.
Yeah, the owners of the company, Albert Trostel, and the people that were working in Falk, who was working in an employment office, began to make improvements within the company, such as materials that they needed so that they wouldn't have to work so hard, wouldn't have to burn their hands and work real hard. So they made sure that they had clean gloves. They had forks, things that they could pull the hides out of the soaking in the it's the material. What is it called?
In the brine.
Who?
Brine.
Right, grind. And then they set up some other things that caused them to work in a clean atmosphere. It was really filthy in that area. And from that point on, they started improving, and the relationship was fantastic. And what Elmer Winter did with Manpower, because he was working with the federal government, he set up a program to help workers learn how to read in about 20 different states. And